He was carried through the streets of Rome on a gilded chair, his crimson robes catching the sunlight as thousands watched in reverent silence. He raised his hand, fingers adorned with rings worth a kingdom, and murmured a blessing over the city. And yet behind those hallowed walls, the same man had once ordered the murder of a rival cardinal over a game of political chess gone awry. They called him the Vicar of Christ, but in secret, he was the master of sin. History tends to remember popes as pious old men with gentle eyes and solemn voices. But the truth is far stranger and much, much darker. Tonight we will step beyond the marble facades and holy hymns. We will slip quietly into candlelit corridors where whispers of betrayal echo still. We will learn the secrets of the throne of St. Peter where not all who sat upon it were saints. Let us begin with a question. What happens when the most powerful religious leader on earth has no fear of hell? Centuries ago, during the dark bloom of the Middle Ages, the papacy was no serene sanctuary. It was a battlefield, a chessboard, a palace dripping in intrigue. It was a house of power, ambition, and sometimes horror. You've heard of emperors drunk with power. But have you ever heard of a pope who threw wild orgies in the apostolic palace? Or a man-elected pope who had never even been ordained a priest? What about the time a dead pope was dug up, dressed in full regalia, and put on trial? No, this is not fiction. This is history. Real, documented, uncomfortable, fascinating history. So make yourself comfortable. Let the candle flicker beside you. Let the world slow down. We are about to stroll slowly and gently through 500 years of the papacy's strangest, darkest, and most scandalous moments. And it begins not with a coronation, but with a corpse. The year was 897 AD. The Pope was dead. His name was Formosus. His reign had been troubled, filled with wars, enemies, shifting alliances, but all of that should have ended with his death. It didn't. 9 months after he was buried, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, ordered Formosus's body exhumed. His rotting corpse was dressed in papal robes, propped up on a throne, and placed on trial. Yes, an actual trial. A deacon stood beside the corpse and answered questions on its behalf. This grotesque spectacle came to be known as the Cadaver Synod. And what was the verdict? Guilty of what? Of usurping the papal office? His body was stripped of robes, his blessing fingers were chopped off, and he was tossed into the Tiber River. The people of Rome were horrified. Stephen VI was later imprisoned and strangled in his cell. And that was just the 9th century. Let us drift forward, like a leaf on the Tiber, to a time where the papacy would become something closer to a dynasty, a prize fought over by noble families like the Colonnas, the Orsinis, and the powerful Borgia clan. Ah, yes, the Borgias. You've heard their name whispered in fiction. But the truth is quieter, darker, and somehow even more shocking. Rodrigo Borgia. He became Pope Alexander VI in 1492. A year of exploration, of Columbus. And yet, while ships set sail for the New World, Alexander was exploring something far closer to home: corruption. He bought the papacy with bribes so vast they nearly emptied the Vatican's coffers. He had mistresses, children, power beyond imagining. But it was his son, Cesare Borgia, who would become the model for Machiavelli's, the prince, a man of cunning, cruelty, and chilling ambition. There are whispers of poisonings, incest, of political murders carried out at midnight under the frescoed ceilings of the Vatican. Is it true? No one knows for certain. But coins don't lie. Records don't lie. When you trace the silver, it always leads back to power. Power and the willingness to do anything to keep it, even kill. Not all popes were monsters, of course. Many were scholars, artists, devout, but even the pious were not always safe. In 1046, Pope Gregory VI was accused of buying his office in what was known as simonia sin, so severe it shook the Church to its foundations. The Holy Roman Emperor stepped in and demanded Gregory resign. He did, quietly, without protest. He died in obscurity, but the stain remained. Then there was Pope Benedict IX. His name does not appear once in the annals of the papacy, but 3 times. He became pope first at the age of 11 or 12, yes, a child pope. He was driven out by mobs, returned, driven out again, and astonishingly sold the papacy like a piece of land to his godfather, who then became Pope Gregory VI. Benedict later regretted the sale and tried to reclaim the throne. In total, he held the papacy 3 times and was excommunicated twice. He lived a life of debauchery, indulgence, and confusion. The Church's own records called his behavior a life as foul as it was execrable. There was no one quite like Benedict IX, and thankfully there never was again. We drift now to Avignon, in France. The papacy was relocated there for nearly 70 years, in what was called the Babylonian captivity of the Church. Why politics, pressure, power? The French crown had grown tired of Italian popes. And so the papacy was moved, becoming a kind of puppet, housed in palaces, far from Rome's ancient stones. It was during this era that indulgences flourished, payments for sins. The Church grew wealthy, Rome grew poorer, and soon rival claimants to the papacy emerged. One pope in Avignon, another in Rome. This became the Great Schism. For decades, there were 2 popes, sometimes even 3 all, claiming to be the true successor of St. Peter. Christendom fractured. Who was the real pope? No one knew. But everyone paid taxes to someone. And through it all, the scandals continued. One pope fathered a child while publicly preaching chastity. Another imprisoned his enemies in underground cells for decades. There were allegations of orgies, drunkenness, backroom deals with kings and emperors, and even a pope who dabbled in alchemy. And yet, the Church survived. Like a mighty oak, the papacy weathered storms that would have shattered other institutions. It endured betrayals, invasions, plagues, wars, and the blackened hearts of some of its own leaders. Because for every Pope John XII who was said to have died in bed with a married woman, there was a Pope Gregory I, wept every time he preached. So moved was he by the burden of his office. For every scandal, a saint; for every corruption, a reformer. The papacy is not a single story. It is 1,000 stories, woven through centuries, touched by both divinity and darkness. And now, as you drift deeper into this quiet reverie, as the night stretches long and soft around you, we will continue to unearth these stories one by one. There are still popes to meet, still sins to uncover, still secrets to whisper, and our journey has only just begun. We linger now in the 10th century, a time not remembered for peace or piety, but for an era so lawless, so unmoored from sacred order, that it gained a title whispered by medieval chroniclers with trembling pens: the Saeculum Obscurum, the Dark Century. Some call it the Pornocracy. Others, the Rule of the Harlots. It was a time when the women of one Roman family, the powerful and notorious Theophylact clan, used their beauty, cunning, and influence to control the papal throne like a private inheritance. At the center of it all stood Marozia, daughter of Theophylact I, Count of Tusculum, and later allegedly the lover of Pope Sergius III. From this scandalous union, it is said, a child was born. That child would grow up to become Pope John XI. If true, he was the son of a pope, and the grandson of a Roman noble, the pawn of his mother. Marozia ruled Rome from behind silken curtains, guiding the fate of pontiffs with the flick of her wrist. Some she enthroned, others she destroyed. For nearly half a century, her family dictated the papal line like a dynasty. Rome, once ruled by emperors, had now fallen to a nobility steeped in lust, gold, and whispered threats. And as for Pope Sergius III, the man said to be her lover, he rose to power by murdering his predecessor's supporters. He exhumed a rival pope's body, desecrated the grave, and declared himself the sole rightful heir to St. Peter. What had become of the throne of Christ? A battlefield, a love affair, family heirloom, one chronicler of the time wrote simply. They turned the papal office into a brothel. We may never know all the names. Not all the papal records survived. Some were destroyed. Others never written. But the stories found their way through history's cracks. One tale speaks of Pope John XII, perhaps the most scandalous pope in history. Was crowned pope at just 18 years old, some say younger, turned the Lateran Palace into a den of debauchery, gambling, women, wine. Horses were said to have been stabled inside churches. He was accused of invoking pagan gods during games of dice, of toasting to the devil, of blinding and castrating his rivals. In his end, he died in the bed of a married woman. Some say he was struck down by God. Others say the husband returned home early. Whichever the truth, the papacy was left vacant once more. And the people of Rome, weary of sin draped in silk, begged for reform. But reform is slow, and temptation ever swift. We now follow the silver thread of history further. To a time when not all popes were content to rule Rome, some dreamed of ruling the world. Consider Pope Innocent III, a man both brilliant and ruthless. He declared that the Pope stood between God and man, wielding power over both emperors and kings. His word was law. His reach extended across Europe, and those who defied him were swiftly punished. He excommunicated King John of England. He launched crusades, not only in the Holy Land, but in Europe itself, against fellow Christians he deemed heretical. Innocent was no sinner in the flesh, but in power. In his hands, the church became not just a shepherd to the soul, but a ruler of realms. But even Innocent could not stem the tides that followed him. Corruption returned, graft, nepotism. The selling of indulgences, a practice that allowed the wealthy to buy forgiveness, grew grotesque. Money flowed into the Vatican like a golden river, and with it came pride, greed, and scandal. And then finally, there was a man who could remain silent no longer. Martin Luther. A German monk, troubled by the church's excesses, he nailed his 95 theses to a door in Wittenberg. He called out the corruption, the buying of offices, the sale of salvation, the hypocrisy at the heart of the church. The Pope at the time, Leo X, dismissed him at first. A drunken German, he called him. But soon Luther's words spread like wildfire. In Leo X, he excommunicated him, and then returned to his feasts, his banquets, his hunting lodges. This Pope-born Giovanni de' Medici was a child of Florence's richest family. He was raised with art, music, and privilege. He loved pageants, masks. He commissioned the building of St. Peter's Basilica and paid for it with indulgences. His critics would later say, he sold heaven to buy marble. The cracks were now impossible to hide. The Reformation had begun. It shattered the unity of Christendom. Kings broke away. Churches splintered. And the papacy found itself in a storm not even its darkest popes could have imagined. Still it endured. Time passed. And from the ashes of division came another chapter. We turn now to a pope who held the church through yet another kind of fire. Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope. He did not hide his children, promoted them, Cesar, Lucretia. Their names are etched in scandal. He threw lavish feasts, where cardinals danced beside courtesans. Rumors swirled of poisoned wine, disappearing rivals, alliances formed in bedchambers rather than chapels. He used the papacy like a weapon, cutting deals, forging armies, buying silence. When he died, his body was said to have turned black and bloated, oozing from the mouth. Some whispered that the devil had come to collect his due, but others remembered him as clever, as strong, as a man who saw the papacy for what it had become, a prize. And he had one, but not forever. For no pope rules forever. And the stories, the scandals, they fade slowly, like incense in an empty cathedral. Yet each one leaves a trace, a lesson, a warning, a mystery. And so, dear listener, if your eyes are growing heavy, if your breath is slowed, rest now, for our journey continues ever deeper. There are still popes in shadow, still sins behind lace, still truths buried beneath the weight of centuries. Tonight is long, and so is history. We are in no rush. The next scandal waits just ahead. Sleep comes slowly when secrets whisper louder than prayers. Rodrigo Borgia, the man who would become Pope Alexander VI, was born in 1431 in the town of, in the Kingdom of Valencia, modern-day Spain. He was a nephew of Pope Calixtus III, who elevated him to cardinal at a young age. But Rodrigo was not born to kneel. He was a man who understood the currency of Rome, not just gold, not just favors, but influence. And he collected it like an artist gathers colors, delicately, patiently, then with strokes so bold they stunned his rivals. Before he became pope, Rodrigo Borgia fathered several children. He did not hide them. He was proud of them. He was Cesar, ruthless, brilliant, a general before he was a priest. There was Juan, beloved, indulgent, perhaps too careless for the world of knives behind curtains. Lucretia, the most famous of all, her name forever tangled with poison, beauty, and tragedy. And the youngest, little more than a pawn. When Rodrigo became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, he threw a celebration unlike any Rome had seen in generations. Drums echoed through the streets. Musicians played. The fountains flowed with wine. The papal palace became a theater, and the people rich and poor cheered their new shepherd, not with reverence but with anticipation. They knew what was coming, and they were right. The Vatican under Alexander became a palace of pleasure. By day, the business of the church continued ceremonies, bulls, diplomatic letters written in Latin on stiff parchment. But by night, the halls trembled with laughter and music. Dancers twirled under candlelight. The Borgia coat of arms gleamed in gold, high above doors that led to hidden banquets. Cardinals, noblemen, ambassadors all knew that influence was best exchanged not in the cathedral, but at the dinner table, or at the bedchamber. One chronicler of the time described a party known as the Banquet of the Chestnuts. Held in the Apostolic Palace, it was said that 50 courtesans danced nude before the Pope and his guests. With chestnuts strewn across the floor for them to crawl after, guests wagered gold on who could perform the most acts of carnal excess. We must pause here, for this event scandalous, as it may have been exaggerated. The chronicler, Johann Burchard, was a Vatican official, but also a man with his own loyalties. Yet the rumor lived on, because it fit. The truth? Rodrigo Borgia was a master manipulator, a seducer of kings and queens, a man who believed the papacy was not a burden, but a prize to be enjoyed. He enriched his family, elevated his children, and brought the full might of Rome behind the name Borgia. But power comes at a cost. One night in 1497, the body of his favorite son, Juan, was pulled from the Tiber River. He had been murdered, stabbed multiple times, his body bound in weights. Who killed him? Was it political enemies, jealous nobles, his own brother Cesar? The truth was never discovered. But the grief broke Rodrigo in ways Rome had never seen. The man who had laughed through scandals now wept behind closed doors. He closed his court. He spoke only in whispers. And for a brief moment, the mask of Pope Alexander VI's slipped hand revealed a father undone. But he recovered, and Cesar rose. Cesar Borgia gave up the cardinal's red hat and became a military commander. Handsome, cunning, terrifying, he conquered lands for his father, crushed noble families, and ruled central Italy with the elegance of a lion and the precision of a knife. He wore black armor, carried a sword of Toledo steel, and smiled like a man who had already calculated your death. Many said Cesar was the real pope, that Alexander merely kept the throne warm while his son expanded the Borgia dominion. But ambition is a feast that ends in poison. In 1503, Pope Alexander VI fell ill. Some said it was fever. Others said he drank the wrong wine. Rumors swirled. Cesar had meant to poison another cardinal, and the cup had passed to his father instead. That a rival had finally succeeded in striking down the Borgia pope. His body, they said, turned black, swelled grotesquely and leaked fluid. Few dared attend his burial. He had ruled for 11 years, and in that time reshaped the papacy into something far more than spiritual, something imperial. After his death, Caesar's power crumbled. He was imprisoned, exiled, forgotten, and Lucretia. She was married 3 times, 2 men chosen by her father, discarded like pawns when the board changed. Some said she poisoned her enemies with a ring. Others called her a victim of men's ambition. She died young, her face serene, her life still debated to this day. And the Borgias, their name became legend, symbol of corruption, yes, but also of brilliance, of boldness, of the razor's edge between virtue and vice. Let us breathe here for a moment. Air in this chapter is heavy, dense with incense and sin, but it is not the end. There are other popes less famous, but no less tangled in shadow, like Pope Julius II, the warrior pope. He marched into battle in full armor, leading troops personally. Heave commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He was vulgar, bold, and unrepentant. He once said, "I am not afraid of war. I'm afraid of not being remembered." He would be remembered as both patron of genius and a man who thought the sword holier than the cross. And there was Pope Urban VI, who grew so paranoid he had cardinals tortured and thrown into rivers, and was tied to a sack of bricks and hurled into the sea. His crime? Speaking too softly. And Pope Boniface VIII. Boniface. He declared that submission to the Pope was necessary for salvation. He claimed absolute authority. He waged political war with King Philip IV of France, who sent men to capture him. He was beaten, humiliated, and died shortly after. Dante placed him in hell in the Divine Comedy, buried upside down among the simoniacs, those who bought and sold church offices. Poetic justice. But justice still. As you drift now somewhere between sleep and waking, imagine Rome under moonlight. The marble halls of the Vatican, empty chairs, faded paintings, dust upon old books no one dares to open. Each pope we've met, there are others dozen who lived, sinned, ruled, and vanished. In the years that followed the death of Alexander VI, Europe convulsed. The Reformation tore Christendom in two. Wars were waged in God's name, and the incense of cathedrals mingled with the gunpowder of battlefields. Yet from the ashes of division rose a pope determined to reclaim both souls and territory. Paul III, born Alessandro Farnese. He was 66 years old when he ascended the throne in 1534, silver hair framing a face carved by ambition. From the start, he moved like a master chess player, convened the Council of Trent not once, but 3 times over 18 years to redefine Catholic doctrine in response to Protestant critiques. He commissioned Michelangelo to sculpt, painters to fresco, architects to rebuild St. Peter's in a glory that would declare, "We endure." But Paul III's reforms did not erase his nepotism. He elevated 2 grandsons to cardinalate, one barely 14, and showered his family with lands and titles. Rome's palaces swelled with Farnese banners, while humble believers struggled under heavy tides. The Pope, who spoke of spiritual renewal, also spoke in terms of real estate, seizing towns and castles to secure his dynasty. And then there was the Inquisition, an engine of fear that lurked in every corner of Catholic lands. Under Paul III it gained new life. Accusations of heresy meant secret trials, confiscation of property, and, at times, the stake. The shadow of the Holy Office lengthened across Italy and Spain, each tribunal a reminder that faith, once a sanctuary, had become a courtroom. Yet Paul III understood that fear alone could not restore the Church's glory. He needed miracles. And so he canonized saints by the dozens, each new holy figure a beacon against Protestant criticism. He understood publicity centuries before the word existed. A statue in marble, an indulgence in silver. Long after his death, skeptics would whisper that Farnese's greatest miracle was the very existence of his family's fortune. But the council he birthed would echo through centuries, shaping theology and practice in ways no scandal could erase. We glide now toward the papacy of Sixtus Vephalis Peredia, man born to poverty who climbed through monastic ranks by sheer will. He reordered the streets of Rome, built aqueducts to feed its fountains, and erected obelisks to cast new shadows upon ancient stones. He overhauled the curia, streamlined administration, and took a ruthless hand to corruption. 39 cardinals were deposed, dozens more disciplined. Some betrayed him, most feared him. Yet Sixtus's iron rule came at a price. He forged alliances with Spain and France, playing them against each other to bolster papal temporal power. He enforced morality with an inquisition of his own design, arresting beggars, prostitutes, and loiterers alike. He died at 58, his constitution worn thin by exhausting labors and, perhaps by too many nights poring over ledgers of sin. Pause here. Feel the pulse of centuries beneath your ear, heartbeats of triumph and terror, of faith and fear. The Reformation raged on. Catholic and Protestant princes readied armies. Meanwhile in Rome, another pope prepared his own campaign. Clement VIII. He was the man who would absolve Henry IV of France, turning a former Protestant king into most Christian majesty. He brokered alliances, shuffled divorces, and whispered in monarchs' ears. At his request, a parcel of land was grafted onto the Vatican estate, what you now know as the Vatican Gardens. Yet for every rose he planted in diplomacy, a thorn of mistrust grew among the faithful. He expelled Jews who refused conversion. He funded Jesuit missions that poured across oceans to convert souls by any means necessary. Under Clement VIII, the Church became a global enterprise, a vast network of priests, soldiers, and spies. Every mission church in the New World, every Jesuit college in Europe, bore his imprint. But at home, Rome's coffers were squeezed to pay for expeditions. Inquisition tribunals, and the opulence of a papal court still bent on dazzling the world. And as the 17th century dawned, the line between shepherd and sovereign blurred further. Urban VIII claimed kinship with the Barberini family as a mandate to govern with near-absolute power. He warred with Venice, taxed the faithful, and amassed art with a fervor rivaling any Medici. Under his reign, Galileo was tried for heresy. The stars themselves became a battleground between faith and reason. Imagine to yourself now those cool stone staircases, the hush of corridors where secrets twist like smoke. Every cardinal's whisper, every scandalous rumor, every aborted coal danced together beneath the frescoed ceilings where angels and devils contended for the faithful. Gaze, and yet, in the darkness, the flame of faith persisted. For alongside those who abused the office, there were men and women who lived it as devotion. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Francis de Sales, whose piety reshaped Catholic spirituality even as popes schemed. Our journey through these scandalous centuries carries us beyond mere titillation. It reminds us that the papacy was never immune to human frailty, and that power when cloaked in prayer can become the greatest temptation of all. As your breath deepens, know that more stories await. The French Revolution's assault on the tiara, Pius IX's flight from Rome, the trials of modernity and Vatican II's hush. But perhaps tonight we will pause higher amid grand palaces and hidden dungeons. Brothels and monasteries too. Let these tales sink like soft feathers across your mind, to let the contrast of sin and sanctity lull you toward rest. When Pope Urban VIII died in 1644, the Church sighed with exhaustion. His wars had drained Rome's treasury. His art commissions, though magnificent, left the city lavish but starved. His family, the Barberini, had swollen with power, yet as he lay cold in his tomb, many whispered, "Will God forgive a pope who built more statues than schools?" Or succeeded by Pope Innocent, the 10th a man of icy resolve and wary eyes? His family, the Pamphilj, were rivals to the Barberini, and he wasted no time in purging their influence. He ordered investigations. He demanded accounts. He summoned princes and scolded cardinals. Rome for a time became a city of audits, not alleluias. But Innocent X, like many before him, was not without his own entanglements. Though a bachelor in theory, his court was dominated by a woman, Donna Olympia Maid-Alchini, his sister-in-law. She was brilliant, cunning, and described by some as the female pope. Was Olympia who managed appointments, whispered behind veils, and arranged access to the Holy Father himself. Gossip flooded the streets. Was she his advisor, or something more? Some said she entered his chamber at night. Others believed she used his age and illness to rule by proxy. When he died, she allegedly refused to pay for his funeral. And it was whispered that his body lay unattended, decomposing in a dark room, until servants found the funds. Whether true or exaggerated, the tale was repeated in every tavern from Naples to Paris. The papacy, it seemed, was a stage, and the mask of holiness often slipped. In 1676, the Church saw the rise of Pope Innocent XI, a man of austerity and reform. He banned nepotism, chastised immoral clergy, and resisted the absolute monarchy of Louis XIV of France. He even forbade women from appearing on stage in Rome, as theaters, a move that pleased the Puritans and enraged the artists. Yet even Innocent XI was caught in contradictions. He tolerated the slave trade, allowing Catholic countries to buy and sell humans so long as they were baptized. His coins bore the Latin inscription Non nobis Domini, not unto us. O Lord, while his signature grace decrees that allowed spiritual salvation to coexist with economic exploitation. For every candle he lit, a shadow grew somewhere else. And so we arrive at the 18th century, an age of enlightenment and control. Popes became less priestly, more princely. They wore velvet, rode in gilded carriages, and entertained diplomats in palatial drawing rooms. The Church, ever ancient, tried to wear the wig and waistcoat of modern Europe, but the fit was awkward. Pope Clement XIV in 1773 made a decision that shook the world. He suppressed the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits under immense pressure from European monarchs who feared their influence. These were the Church's most educated, most feared missionaries. Some called them saints, others called them spies. Clement signed the brief with trembling hands. Weeks later, he fell ill. Rumors spread that he had been poisoned by Jesuit sympathizers. Some said he cried at night, haunted by what he had done. He died under mysterious circumstances and was buried with haste. Then came the French Revolution. The Papal States, once mighty, were invaded. Priests were slaughtered. Bishops fled. Pope Pius VI was taken prisoner by Napoleon's forces and marched across Europe like a relic of the Old World. He died in French captivity, a pope without a throne. His successor, Pius VII, endured humiliation and house arrest under Napoleon. But after the emperor's fall, he returned to Rome, a symbol of endurance. He forgave his captors. He embraced the artists and reformed the bureaucracy. And yet even then scandal never slept. In the 19th century, the papacy waged its last great battle against modernity. Pope Pius IX, once a liberal reformer, turned reactionary after revolutionaries stormed. Rome in 1848, he declared the Pope infallible in matters of faith, a dogma many found unsettling. How could one man so clearly human claim such divine immunity? He called himself the prisoner of the Vatican after Italian unification stripped the Church of its territories. Behind high walls, surrounded by loyal cardinals, he brooded for years. His death in 1878 marked the end of an era, the last pope to rule a kingdom, as well as a church. And still, the scandals flowed like wine in the cellars of the Sistine Chapel. Let us wander now to the 20th century. A modern world. A world of telephones, trains, and world wars. Pope Benedict XV tried to mediate peace during World War I, offering diplomacy while shells rained on Europe. He was mocked, ignored, and accused of siding with Germany. His health collapsed under the strain. He died quietly, his funeral barely attended as nations buried millions of their own. Then came Pius, the 11th, a complex man. He condemned fascism and Nazism, but also signed the Lateran Treaty with Mussolini, granting the Vatican independence. Some said it was a necessary evil, others called it betrayal. Under his successor, Pope Pius XII, the Church faced its greatest test, the Holocaust. To this day, debates rage. Did Pius XII do enough? He sheltered some Jews in Vatican buildings, but he never publicly condemned Hitler by name. Was he cautious or complicit? Did he protect the Church's interests at the cost of moral clarity? His defenders point to the thousands saved in secret. His critics point to the silence that echoed across Europe as trains rolled toward death camps. Even as history drifts toward the modern era, the papacy remained tethered to controversy. The Vatican bank scandal in the 1980s. The mysterious death of Pope John Paul I after just 33 days in office. The cover-ups of abuse cases in the 1990s and 2000s all remind us that the robe of St. Peter is stitched with both glory and grief. And yet, the Church endures. With Pope John Paul II came charisma, global tours, and a renaissance of faith among millions. He survived an assassination attempt, embraced modern media, and stood firm against communism in his native Poland. Yet even he was not free from criticism. Any said he ignored the cries of abuse victims too long. Then came Pope Benedict XVI, a scholar, shy and serious. He shocked the world by resigning, the first pope to do so in over 600 years. Some say it was for health. Others whispered that it was to avoid deeper scandal within the Curia. And now, Pope Francis, the first Jesuit pope. The first from the Americas. He speaks of humility, rides in a modest car, washes the feet of prisoners, and challenges capitalism's cruelty. But even he navigates a church riven by division, progressive and traditionalist wings, clashing like tides. Whispers persist. about cardinals feuding in secret, about financial corruption within Vatican walls, about sins both ancient and ongoing. And yet the bells still ring, the incense still rises, pilgrims still come. Not because the church is perfect, but because, perhaps, it is not. Because in that tension between the sacred and the scandalous, we find something achingly human. As you rest now, tucked into silence, imagine those halls, once more papal footsteps echoing under frescoed domes. Prayers whispered in shadow, the eternal city sleeping beneath stars that never judge. And know this, the history of the papacy is not just a list of names and scandals. It is a mirror of mankind, our thirst for power, our hunger for redemption, our ability to both betray and believe. And it will continue, long after we are gone. While the world outside the Vatican walls, changed empires collapsed. Machines roared, and ideologies rose, and fell, the papacy endured, humming like an old hymn through centuries of turmoil. And yet, with every age came new shadows. In the modern era, scandal no longer hid in candlelight. It came roaring into the open, dragged by flashing cameras, headlines, and a global audience no longer content to whisper in church pews. By the early 2000s, an avalanche had begun. One that had been building for decades in silence, in confessionals, in monasteries, in diocesan offices. The child abuse crisis, long covered, broke open. Diocese after diocese, country after country. The truth was undeniable. Priests had abused children. Bishops had moved them from parish to parish, covering sin with silence. And the Vatican, for far too long, had hesitated, delayed, deflected. The world gasped. For a church that once held inquisitions, that once policed heresy with fire and steel, this failure, this betrayal of innocence was too monstrous to ignore. Under Pope John Paul II, initial responses were cautious. He acknowledged the horror. But many felt his trusted advisors minimized the crisis. One figure loomed large in the scandal's long shadow, Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston. In 2002, Law resigned after investigative reporters uncovered his repeated reassignment of known abusers. He fled to Rome, where he was given a ceremonial post in a basilica. His presence there was a wound that never healed for many Catholics. The scandal deepened under Pope Benedict XVI, who, before his papacy, had led the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He was seen by some as part of the machinery that had failed to act decisively, but also by others as one of the few within the Curia trying to force a reckoning. He defrocked hundreds of priests. He publicly acknowledged the pain of victims. And then, in 2013, in a move that shook the foundations of tradition, he resigned. Not from scandal, but perhaps from the weight of what he inherited. It was the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years. And from that resignation rose a new voice. Pope Francis. He was different from the moment he stepped out onto the balcony. No golden robes, no papal throne. Just a white cassock and a simple greeting. Buonasera. The world leaned in. A Jesuit, a man of the slums of Buenos Aires, he spoke of mercy, inclusion, and humility. He visited prisons, kissed the feet of refugees, and chose a tiny guest house over the papal palace. He was the people's pope. But no man, not even a pope, can outrun the machinery of history. Under Francis, the church faced renewed scrutiny. New waves of abuse revelations emerged. Chile, Germany, the United States, France, and beyond. Entire episcopates were rocked. Resignations, trials, apologies. He promised change. He launched reforms. He met with victims. He defrocked powerful figures, most notably Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, once a Washington, D.C. archbishop, who was stripped of his title and removed from ministry. Yet critics said more was needed. Why were so many secrets still sealed in archives? Why did silence still reign in certain dioceses? Why were survivors still waiting for justice? And alongside these questions, another storm brewed. The growing divide within the church itself. Conservative factions bristled at Francis' openness. His statements about same-sex civil unions, his outreach to non-believers, his criticism of capitalism, each one, stirred the waters. Anonymous letters, veiled threats. Open criticism from within the hierarchy erupted in ways the Vatican had not seen in generations. It was no longer heretics at the gates. It was brother against brother, cardinal against cardinal. And yet, Francis carried on, aging, smiling, preaching hope. Traveling to war zones, slums, and shrinking churches across Europe, each trip a reminder that faith persists, even in fracture. Because that is the true scandal of the papacy. Not the sin, not the cover-up, not the hypocrisy. Though all of these have scarred it. No, the scandal is that, despite it all, it endures. Through fire and famine, through war and plague, through corruption and confusion, the chair of St. Peter still stands. And for every pope who lived as a prince, there were those who lived as servants. Gregory the Great, who fed the starving. Leo the Great, who rode alone to face Attila the Hun. John the 23rd, who opened the windows of the church in Vatican II. Even Francis, kneeling with broken limbs, urging the world to care for its poor. Perhaps the papacy survives because it reflects us. In every scandalous pope is our own hunger for power. In every reforming pope is our own longing for redemption. In every contradiction, opulence and poverty, wisdom and blindness, we find our own story, dressed in holy robes. So sleep now, dear listener, with these thoughts resting on your soul. Not all history is boring. Not all scandal is evil. Sometimes it is simply human, achingly human, set on a stage that's been burning for 2,000 years. And in the silence of the night, if you listen closely, you might still hear it. The rustle of a papal cassock, the sigh of a Vatican door, the whisper of prayer and secrets, because history never sleeps. It only waits for the next chapter. And you, lucky dreamer, are already halfway there. Good night, and when you wake, come back. We've only just begun.